some point, you noticed it. The feeder you put up, the one you've refilled a dozen times, started coming back full. The birds that used to queue along your fence in the morning stopped showing up. The garden went quiet, and you couldn't work out why. Nothing obvious had changed. You were still putting the food out. The feeder was still there, but they were gone. Here's the thing, they didn't leave for no reason. Birds are not random. Every decision a small bird makes, where to feed, when to move, what to avoid, is driven by something real and specific, something measurable. Which means if the birds in your garden have stopped coming, something changed, something you may not have even noticed. And in most cases, it comes down to a small number of things that are completely fixable, once you know what to look for. Before we get into the reasons, it helps to understand something about how birds actually think about food. A garden feeder is not a restaurant, not to a bird. To a blue tit or a chaffinch or a house sparrow, a feeder is a calculated risk. Every time a small bird lands on an exposed perch to feed, it's making a survival decision. It's leaving the cover of a hedge, sitting still in the open, and trusting that nothing is going to come for it while it's eating. That calculation changes constantly, based on what it saw yesterday, based on what it smelled, based on what the other birds in its group are doing, based on signals most of us never notice. The RSPB estimates that around half of British households put food out for garden birds. That's roughly 14 million gardens with feeders. And yet, surveys consistently show that bird visits to gardens have been declining. Not because there are fewer birds, but because the birds that exist are making different choices. They're choosing other gardens, other food sources, other places where the calculation feels safer. Which raises the obvious question: what tipped the calculation in yours? Let's start with the most common cause, and the one most people never suspect: the feeder itself. Not the location, not the food, the physical object hanging in your garden. Here's what happens. You put up a feeder. Birds find it, use it, come back regularly. Over weeks and months, that feeder accumulates something invisible. Old seed husks, mold, bird droppings, the oils from hundreds of beaks and feet. It starts to smell. Not to you. Your nose isn't calibrated for it. But to a bird, which has a far more sensitive chemical detection system than we give it credit for, the feeder starts to broadcast a warning signal. It smells like disease. It smells like death. And birds, creatures whose entire survival depends on not getting sick, because a sick bird is almost always a dead bird, stop coming. Studies of garden bird behavior have shown that birds will abandon feeders carrying the scent of sick or dead individuals from the same species. This isn't learned. It's instinctive. Millions of years of evolution have wired small birds to treat that signal as an alarm. The fix is almost embarrassingly simple. Clean the feeder. Properly, not a rinse, but a scrub with hot water and a mild disinfectant every 2 to 4 weeks. Let it dry completely before refilling. A clean feeder with fresh food is almost always reoccupied within days. If yours has been outside for 6 months without a proper clean, that's the first thing to try. But cleaning the feeder won't help with the second problem, because the second problem is about something you probably didn't even know you were doing: touch. The oils on human hands are detectable by birds at concentrations we can't begin to measure. When you refill a feeder, you handle the ports, the perches, the tray. You leave behind a chemical signature that some species, particularly more cautious ones like greenfinches and nuthatches, treat as a danger signal. This sounds almost absurd, but it's real. Wildlife rehabilitators and bird ringers have documented it for decades. Birds that have been handled, even briefly, are sometimes avoided by their flockmates for hours afterwards. The scent is that detectable. You can't stop handling your feeder, but you can be more careful about where you hold it. Hold it from the top. Avoid touching the perches and ports directly when you refill. Some people use thin gloves. It makes a measurable difference. Which brings us to a question that takes us somewhere stranger. Because those first two causes, the feeder and the handling, those are the easy problems. The next cause is one that most garden bird guides never mention, and it might be the most important one of all. Here's what I want you to think about for a moment. You've been feeding birds, putting out food, keeping the feeder stocked, doing everything by the usual advice. And they stopped coming anyway. What if the problem isn't the feeder at all? What if it's something about your garden that the birds can see, and you can't? Because here's what we know about how small birds actually choose a feeding location. And it's not just about the food. Birds don't just assess a feeder, they assess the entire environment around it. Before a bird commits to landing, it will typically perch somewhere nearby. A fence post, a branch, a roof edge, and watch. For anywhere between 30 seconds and several minutes, depending on the species. It's reading the garden, checking sightlines, looking for threat signatures. What it's looking for is two things: cover to escape into if something comes, and clear space to spot a threat before it arrives. This is why feeder placement matters far more than most people realize. A feeder in the middle of an open lawn, away from any hedge, shrub or fence, looks like a trap to a small bird. There's nowhere to escape to. The exposure is simply too high. Even if the food is good and the feeder is clean, many birds won't risk it. The ideal placement for most British garden birds is within 2 to 3 meters of a shrub or hedge, close enough to dart to cover in under a second, far enough from the vegetation that a cat can't use it as an ambush point. That last part matters enormously. The UK has an estimated 11 million pet cats. Most of them go outside, and the presence of a cat, even one that isn't actively hunting, changes bird behaviour in a garden for hours after it leaves. Research from the University of Exeter found that birds in gardens with cats visit feeders significantly less often and spend less time at them when they do visit, compared to gardens without cats. And critically, this effect persists even when the cat isn't visible. The birds remember. They've learned that this garden carries a risk, and they adjust accordingly. If a neighborhood cat has started passing through your garden, even occasionally, your birds may have simply reclassified it as a higher risk location. They haven't gone far. They've redistributed to somewhere that feels safer. Positioning feeders higher, on a smooth pole a cat can't climb, helps. Thorny shrubs around the base of a feeding station reduce approach attempts. Neither solution is perfect, but both make a measurable difference. Here's where it gets genuinely strange, though. Because cats and placement, those are physical problems. The third deep cause of birds leaving a garden is entirely invisible, and it's one almost nobody talks about: noise. Not loud, obvious noise. The chronic background noise that's become so normal we've stopped hearing it. Traffic, machinery, a neighbour's air conditioning unit, the constant ambient hum of modern suburban life. Birds communicate in frequency ranges that overlap heavily with low to mid-frequency human noise. The contact calls that small birds use to coordinate a group. The quiet signals that mean, "I found food, come here, this is safe," are exactly the frequencies that get masked by traffic. A garden near a busy road, or in a densely built area with a lot of background noise, is a garden where birds struggle to hear each other properly. And a bird that can't hear its flockmates is a bird that feels exposed and isolated. Over time, bird groups stop choosing those locations. They shift, often just 50 meters away, to quieter gardens where the acoustic environment lets them communicate. Urban ecology research has documented this clearly. bird diversity and visit frequency drops sharply above a certain ambient noise threshold. And the effect is strongest for social species. House sparrows, long-tailed tits, blue tits, precisely the birds most people most want to see. You can't silence a main road, but you can create what ecologists call acoustic shelter. Dense planting along the noisiest boundary of your garden, a thick hedge, a run of shrubs, absorbs and diffuses background sound. It won't make your garden silent, but it can lower the ambient level enough to shift the calculation. And it does something else at the same time, something that connects to the last thing worth understanding here. There's a thread running through everything we've covered: clean feeders, careful handling, thoughtful placement, cover from predators, acoustic shelter. None of these things are really about the food. They're about trust. A garden that birds return to consistently is a garden they trust. Not because they've made a conscious decision. Birds don't think in those terms. But because the accumulated signals coming from that space, day after day, tell a consistent story. This place is safe. This place is reliable. This place is worth the risk. And trust, once lost, takes time to rebuild. If your garden has been avoiding worthy for months, a dirty feeder, an exposed position, a cat passing through, the local birds have already updated their mental map. Your garden has been reclassified. Fixing one thing in isolation won't always be enough. But fix the feeder and the placement and the cover and give it 2 or 3 weeks of consistency. And they come back. They always reassess. The blue tit that stopped visiting 3 months ago hasn't moved to another postcode. It's in the same neighborhood, using the same hedgerows, checking the same locations it always has. It just needs a reason to change its mind. Next time you look out at an empty feeder, I hope you see it a little differently. Not as an absence, as a question with an answer that's entirely within your reach. If this made you curious about what else might be happening in your garden beneath the surface, there's something I've been wanting to look at next. Something that lives underneath your lawn, in a layer most of us walk over every single day without knowing it's there. That one's coming soon.